A homeless girl tries to stop a millionaire from opening his company door, but he pushes her away and they discover something shocking. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Sunday had arrived quietly in the small town of Harmony Creek, nestled in upstate New York, when Harry Blake pulled his silver Tesla up to the Blake Enterprises building. At 30, with an athletic build and a striking presence, Harry was known in the region not only for his accumulated wealth through savvy tech investments, but also for his relentless work ethic. That afternoon in March, a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs through the manicured gardens surrounding the modern 5-story building. Harry had returned to retrieve important documents he had forgotten on his desk, contracts he needed to review before Monday morning's meeting. His determination to maintain absolute control over every detail of his business was a characteristic that both propelled him forward and isolated him from the world around him. As he walked along the deserted sidewalk, his eyes caught a subtle movement near the entrance gate. A small, frail figure was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wrought iron fence. It was a girl who appeared to be no more than 2 years old, although her expression carried a disturbing maturity. Her clothes were colorful rags that were once a dress. Her curly hair was tangled, and in her small hands she held a piece of bread that had already hardened. "Hey, little one," Harry said, crouching down to the child's level. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up, revealing a deep, haunted look that did not match her apparent age. "My name is Willow," she mumbled in a raspy voice. "I'm 4, not 2 like everyone thinks." Harry felt a pang in his chest as he noticed the child's extreme frailty. Willow seemed malnourished. Her arms were thin as twigs, and there was an ancient sadness in her eyes that made the businessman's heart clench inexplicably. "Willow, where are your parents?" he asked, looking around for a responsible adult. "Mummy's been gone a long time," the girl replied, nibbling on the stale bread. "But I know a lot of things she told me before she left." Something in the way Willow spoke intrigued Harry deeply. There was a certainty in her words that contrasted with her vulnerable appearance. He was about to ask for more details when he decided he needed to get inside and retrieve the documents first. "Are you going to stay here?" he asked, heading towards the main entrance. "Don't go in that way," Willow said suddenly, her voice filled with urgency. "Use the back door." Harry stopped, confused. "Why? The main entrance is right here." "Because you need to see what's there," the girl insisted, pointing to the side of the building. "Your mum left important things for you to find." Harry's heart raced. His mother, Eleanor Blake, had passed away 15 years ago when he was only 15. All of her belongings had been lost in the fire that destroyed the family home. How could a 4-year-old know anything about Eleanor? "How do you know about my mother?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "She sang a pretty song," Willow said, closing her eyes. "A song about birds flying far from home. My mommy told me your mommy always sang that song when she was sad." Harry felt the blood run cold in his veins. That specific song was something only he and Eleanor shared, a melody she hummed during the most difficult moments of their lives. No one else could know this intimate detail. Trembling, he walked to the back of the building, followed by Willow, who moved with difficulty due to her weakness. The back door was secured with an old, rusty lock that he barely remembered existed. That entrance had not been used for years. "It's locked," Harry said, turning the knob unsuccessfully. "Force it," Willow whispered. "She wants you to see." With a mixture of curiosity and desperation, Harry pushed the door hard. The lock gave way with a dry crack, and the door opened, revealing a narrow corridor that he did not recognize. The air that escaped from the interior smelled of mildew and dried flowers, an aroma that awakened dormant memories in his mind. Walking through the dimness, he came to a small room in the basement of the building. When he turned on the light, what he saw took his breath away. The walls were covered with photographs of Eleanor at different times in her life, some he had never seen before. There were also yellowed documents, handwritten letters, and personal objects that he was sure had been destroyed in the fire. "How is this possible?" he muttered, picking up one of the photographs where his mother smiled next to an older woman he did not recognize. Willow had followed him into the room and now observed everything with a disturbing familiarity. "Aunt Carol kept everything here," she said simply. "She said one day you would need to know the truth." Harry turned sharply to the girl. Carol Davies was his godmother and the majority shareholder of Blake Enterprises, the woman who practically raised him after Eleanor's passing. How did Willow know Carol? And what truth was this? His hands trembled as he leafed through the documents. There were letters his mother had written to someone called "My Dearest Angel," receipts for medical payments from a private clinic, and photographs of places he had never visited with Eleanor. "Willow," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "who are you really? And how do you know all these things?" The girl approached one of the photographs on the wall where Eleanor held a baby in her arms. "My mommy used to work here," she said, touching the glass delicately. "She told me stories about your mommy every night, sad stories about secrets that weighed on her heart." Harry felt the world around him collapse. Nothing he knew about his family history made sense in light of this discovery, and a 4-year-old seemed to be the only person who could help him decipher the mysteries that his own godmother had hidden from him for so many years. As he watched Willow touch the photographs with familiarity, a terrifying question echoed in his mind. How many other secrets about Eleanor Blake were buried in that room? And what else had his godmother hidden from him all these years? The following weeks became a whirlwind of questions and insomnia for Harry. He had temporarily installed Willow in a guest room of his penthouse, unable to abandon the child who seemed to be his only link to buried secrets about Eleanor. The girl, despite her physical fragility, demonstrated an impressive emotional resilience and a memory that bordered on the impossible for someone her age. During the first days of April, Harry tried to maintain his normal routine in business, but his mind was completely absorbed by the discoveries in the secret room. His investments in tech stocks, which previously occupied hours of his daily attention, were now neglected as he obsessively delved into the documents left by his mother. "Uncle Harry," Willow said one morning, as they had coffee on the wide balcony overlooking the city, "do you want to know about the man from the cemetery?" Harry almost choked on his coffee. "What man from the cemetery, Willow?" "Richard," she replied, nibbling on a piece of toast. "Your mommy used to visit him every month. My mommy, Sarah, used to take me along sometimes. She said your mommy needed to talk to someone about heavy things in her heart." The name Richard echoed in Harry's mind like a distant bell. He vaguely remembered his mother mentioning visits to the cemetery to tend to the graves of her grandparents, but she always went alone. The idea that there was someone specific she met with regularly was completely new to him. "Richard what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Richard Fisher," Willow said with impressive precision. "He takes care of the dead and knows all the secrets of the living. Aunt Carol doesn't like him, but your mommy needed him." That afternoon, Harry decided to confront Carol directly. She was in her office at Blake Enterprises, reviewing plans for a new residential complex that would represent millions in profit for the company. At 55, Carol maintained the natural elegance that had always characterized her, but Harry noticed lines of tension around her eyes that he had never noticed before. "Carol, we need to talk about the room in the basement," he said without preamble, closing the office door. Carol's face paled instantly. She dropped her pen and leaned back in her chair, as if preparing for an inevitable blow. "How did you find out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A 4-year-old girl showed me. A girl who knows details about my mother that I didn't even know," Harry replied, frustration growing in his voice. "Carol, why have you hidden these things from me for 15 years? Tears began to form in Carol's eyes. "Because Eleanor made me promise that I would only tell you when you were man enough to understand. She was afraid that the truth would destroy you when you were still young." "What truth?" Harry demanded, slamming his hands on the table. "What was my mother hiding that was so terrible?" Carol got up and walked to the window, watching the movement of the city below. Your mother carried a terrible weight, Harry, a mistake from the past that haunted her every day of her life. Just tell me, he shouted, losing the patience he was trying to maintain. When Eleanor was 17 years old, before she met your father, she got pregnant, Carol said, still with her back to him. The family forced her to give the child up for adoption, a girl, your half-sister. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. A sister. He had a sister he never knew existed. Where is she? He asked, his voice hoarse. We don't know, Carol replied, turning around with tears streaming down her face. Eleanor spent the last years of her life trying to find her. She hired private detectives, spent a considerable portion of her wealth on searches, but was never able to locate the child she gave up for adoption. Harry sat down heavily in the chair, processing the devastating information. And Richard? Who is this Richard that Willow mentioned? Carol sighed deeply. Richard Fisher is the caretaker of the municipal cemetery, but he was Eleanor's first love. The father of the child she was forced to give up. The revelation hit Harry like a punch to the stomach. His mother maintained contact with the father of her lost daughter, meeting with him regularly under the pretense of visiting graves. They met, he asked, barely able to form the words. Richard never married. He never got over the loss of that daughter, Carol explained. When Eleanor contacted him years later, they started meeting monthly. It wasn't a romantic relationship, Harry. It was two people sharing the same pain, the same guilt. And you knew this the whole time? Harry accused, his voice laced with betrayal. I tried to protect you, Carol said, approaching him. Eleanor was destroyed inside. She loved you more than her own life, but she couldn't forgive herself for abandoning a daughter. She feared that if you knew, you would think less of her. Harry got up abruptly and began pacing back and forth across the office. His mind worked furiously, trying to process decades of lies and half-truths. The letters, he said suddenly, the letters to my dearest angel that I found in the room. They were for her, weren't they? For my sister? Carol nodded silently. And Willow? Harry asked. How does a 4-year-old know all this? Who is her mother? This Sarah she mentions? Carol's face contorted in an even deeper expression of pain. Sarah Hayes worked as Eleanor's personal secretary in the last 2 years of her life. She was a young woman, very dedicated. Eleanor grew fond of her as if she were a daughter. And where is Sarah now? Harry insisted. She disappeared 6 months ago, Carol confessed, her voice breaking. She simply vanished, leaving Willow behind. The girl was living on the streets when you found her. Harry stopped walking, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in his mind. Carol, do you think Sarah could be... I don't know, she said quickly, as if she didn't want to give voice to the same suspicion. But Eleanor always commented that there was something familiar about Sarah, something that reminded her of herself when she was young. That night, Harry couldn't sleep. He walked through the penthouse until he found Willow awake on the balcony, watching the stars through the glass. The girl seemed lost in thoughts too deep for her age. Willow, he said softly, sitting next to her. Do you remember your mommy talking about her family, about where she came from? The girl looked at him with her big, wise eyes. Mommy cried a lot when she talked about it, she said. She said she had lost 2 mothers, the one who had her and the one who raised her, and that now she had found the 3rd, but it was too late. Harry felt a chill run down his spine. If his suspicions were correct, Willow was not just an abandoned child who knew secrets about his family. She could be his niece, Eleanor Blake's granddaughter, and he had been too blind to see the signs that were right before his eyes. But where was Sarah now? And why had she abandoned her own daughter if she had really discovered her true origins? The morning of May arrived laden with a dense fog that covered the mountains around Harmony Creek, as if nature itself conspired to keep the buried secrets. Harry had spent the last 3 weeks in an obsessive search for Richard Fisher, but the man seemed to have disappeared from the municipal cemetery without a trace. "He resigned last week," informed the cemetery administrator, a man with thick glasses who seemed uncomfortable with Harry's insistent questions. "Said he needed to take care of urgent personal matters. Didn't leave a contact address." Willow, who had insisted on accompanying Harry that morning, held his hand tightly as they walked among the old graves. The girl had gained a few pounds since moving in with him, but her fragility was still evident, especially when she spoke about her missing mother. "He used to bring yellow flowers to a grave that didn't have a name," Willow said suddenly, pointing to an older section of the cemetery. "Mummy said that's where he cried for the children he could never raise." Harry felt a pang in his chest as he imagined Richard visiting a symbolic grave to mourn the daughter he never knew. They walked to the area indicated by Willow, where they found only a small grave with a simple, nameless headstone decorated with withered yellow flowers. "How many times did you come here with your mommy?" Harry asked, kneeling down to be at the girl's level. "Lots of times," she replied, touching the dried flowers. "Mommy was always very sad afterward. She said Richard was a good man who had a broken heart, just like her." That afternoon, Harry decided to take more drastic action. He hired a private investigator, Charlie Mendoza, a retired ex-cop who had a reputation for finding missing persons. Charlie was a 50-year-old man, bald, with a grey mustache, who spoke little but promised results. "I need you to find 2 people," Harry said in his office, handing over the little information he had about Richard and Sarah. "And I want to know everything about their past, especially any connection to my mother, Eleanor Blake." Charlie examined the documents with professional attention. Richard Fisher, 60 years old, worked at the cemetery for 30 years. Sarah Hayes, 25 years old, missing for 6 months. I'll need a week to track their movements. While awaiting the results of the investigation, Harry delved even deeper into the documents in the secret room. It was then that he made a discovery that completely changed his perspective on the family's wealth. Among the yellowed papers, he found bank statements showing regular transfers of considerable amounts to an account in the name of Hope Blake, a name he had never heard before. "Carol," he said on the phone, his voice tense, "who is Hope Blake?" The silence on the other end of the line was too long. "Where did you find that name?" she asked finally. "In the bank statements in the room. My mother was transferring money monthly to this person, amounts that represented almost 30% of her income." "I need to come over," Carol said, hanging up abruptly. 20 minutes later, Carol arrived at Harry's penthouse with a pale face and trembling hands. Willow was sleeping on the living room sofa, exhausted from the morning walk to the cemetery. "Hope Blake is the name Eleanor gave to the daughter she gave up for adoption," Carol confessed, sitting heavily in the armchair. "She never knew the name the adoptive parents chose, so she always referred to the girl by that name. But the bank transfers," Harry insisted, "were to a real account with that name." Carol sighed deeply. 5 years ago, Eleanor discovered that she could open a savings account in the name of her lost daughter. She deposited money religiously, hoping for the day when she could give all that money to her. Harry quickly calculated the amounts. "Carol, there's almost $250,000 accumulated in that account. It was Eleanor's way of trying to make up for the years she couldn't take care of her daughter," Carol explained, tears streaming down her face. "She saved every penny possible, reduced her own expenses to a minimum, invested part of her dividend income specifically for that account." "And who has access to that money now?" Harry asked. "Theoretically, only the person who can prove to be Eleanor's lost daughter," Carol replied. "Her lawyer, Mr. Sullivan, has all the necessary documentation for the transfer, but he can only release the funds upon proof of kinship." At that moment, Willow stirred on the sofa, mumbling incomprehensible words in her sleep. Harry approached her and managed to distinguish a few phrases. "Mommy, why didn't you tell me about Grandma? Why did you run away when you found out the truth?" Carol and Harry exchanged glances, the same terrible suspicion echoing in their minds. If Sarah really was Eleanor's lost daughter, that would explain why she had disappeared so abruptly. The discovery of her true origin might have been too overwhelming for her to process. "Carol," Harry said slowly, "do you have a photo of Sarah?" She opened her purse and took out a small photograph. It was a young woman with brown hair, big, expressive eyes, and a shy but genuine smile. What made Harry gasp was the undeniable resemblance to the young photographs of Eleanor he had found in the secret room. "My God," he whispered, "there's no denying the resemblance." "Eleanor noticed it too," Carol confirmed. "In the last months of her life, she kept commenting on how Sarah reminded her of herself in her youth, but she never had the courage to ask directly about the girl's origin. And Sarah never mentioned being adopted. Never. She always talked about the parents who raised her with great affection, but she never went into details about her childhood or origin." That night, Charlie Mendoza called with the first information. "I found Richard Fisher," he said, his voice serious. "He's staying at a boarding house in the neighboring town, Hill Valley, but there's something strange, Mr. Blake." "What?" Harry asked, his heart racing. "He's not alone. There's a young woman with him, about 25 years old, who matches the description of Sarah Hayes. They're living as if they were father and daughter." Harry felt the world spin around him. Richard and Sarah together, living as family. If his suspicions were correct, Sarah's real father had finally found his lost daughter, but they had both fled, leaving Willow abandoned. "Where exactly are they?" Harry asked, already planning to confront them the next day. "Hilltop Inn, room 12. But Mr. Blake, there's one more thing. The woman is pregnant. Very pregnant, appears to be in her 8th month of gestation." Charlie's final revelation left Harry speechless. Sarah had not only discovered her true origin and found her biological father, she was expecting another child. That would explain why she had abandoned Willow, but it also created an even more complex and painful situation. As Harry processed this devastating information, Willow woke up from her sleep and called him with a small, frightened voice. "Uncle Harry, I dreamed about Mommy. She was crying and apologizing. She said she had found the grandpa she never knew, but didn't know how to explain it to me." Harry looked at the girl with a broken heart, realizing that the next day he would have to face not only the people who abandoned Willow, but also confront truths that could forever change the dynamic of his newly discovered family. The trip to Hill Valley the next morning was tense and silent. Harry drove with his hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, while Carol held Willow in the back seat. The girl had insisted on accompanying them, saying she needed to talk to Mommy about important things. Her determination, despite her young age, impressed and moved everyone. The Hilltop Inn was a simple 2-story building, painted faded yellow, located on a quiet street surrounded by pine trees. Harry's heart pounded as they climbed the stairs towards room 12. Each step brought him closer to answers he had sought for months, but also to confrontations that could destroy any chance of reuniting his fragmented family. When they knocked on the door, they heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing Richard Fisher, a 60-year-old man with grey hair, a face marked by time, and eyes that carried decades of sadness. Upon seeing Harry, his face paled instantly. "How did you find us?" he asked, his voice hoarse and tired. "That doesn't matter now," Harry replied, forcing calm into his voice. "I need to talk to Sarah. I need to understand why she abandoned Willow." Richard looked at the girl who was hiding behind Carol's legs, and his face contorted with pain. "She didn't want to abandon the girl," he said, opening the door wider. "But when she found out the truth about who she really was, she panicked." They entered the simple room, furnished only with a double bed, a small table, and 2 chairs. Sitting on the bed, with the visibly large belly of advanced pregnancy, was Sarah Hayes. At 25, she had the same delicate face that Harry had seen in the photograph, but now her eyes were swollen from crying, and her expression carried an overwhelming weight of guilt. "Willow," Sarah whispered upon seeing her daughter, extending her trembling arms. "My little one, forgive me." Willow hesitated for a moment, then ran into her mother's arms, beginning to cry loudly. "Why did you leave me, Mommy? I was so scared." "I'm so sorry, my daughter," Sarah cried, hugging Willow with desperation. "Mommy found out things about her family that she didn't know how to explain to you. I was confused and scared." Harry approached slowly. "Sarah, you're Eleanor Blake's daughter, aren't you?" She raised her red eyes to him and nodded silently. "I found out 6 months ago when I was organizing Miss Blake's last personal documents in the office. I found a hidden folder with birth certificates, adoption papers, and photographs of me as a baby." Richard sat down on the chair next to the bed, his hands shaking. "Eleanor never had the courage to tell the truth directly to Sarah," he explained. "But she left clues, hoping that one day she would find out on her own." "And you," Harry said, looking at Richard, "how do you fit into all this?" "I'm Sarah's biological father," Richard confessed, tears streaming down his bearded face. "Eleanor and I were sweethearts when she got pregnant at 17. Our families separated us by force, and we never saw each other again until she looked me up at the cemetery 30 years later." Carol, who had remained silent until then, approached Sarah. "Honey, why didn't you contact me when you found out? I could have helped you process this information." "I was terrified," Sarah sobbed. "I found out that I had worked for my own biological mother for 2 years without knowing it, that she had died a few months after I started working for her, and that Richard, whom I knew only as the kind caretaker of the cemetery, was my father." "But why run away?" Harry asked, feeling a mixture of compassion and frustration. "Why leave Willow?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair before answering. "Because I found out I was pregnant again, and the child's father abandoned me when he found out about the pregnancy. I couldn't handle being a single mother of 2 young children, especially after discovering that I had a family I never knew." Richard held Sarah's hand. "When she looked me up, desperate and pregnant, I brought her here. I wanted to take care of her, as I could never do when she was a baby." "But Willow needed you," Carol said firmly. "A 4-year-old child cannot simply be abandoned because the adults are confused." "I know," Sarah cried. "Every day I missed her terribly, but I didn't know how to go back and explain everything. How to tell a 4-year-old that I found out I'm the granddaughter of the woman I worked for?" Harry looked around the simple room, processing all the emotional complexity of the situation. His half-sister had finally been found, but at the cost of his niece's abandonment. His brother-in-law had found his lost daughter, but they lived hidden as fugitives. "Sarah," he said softly, "do you know about the inheritance our mother left for you?" She looked at him confused. "What inheritance?" Carol opened her purse and took out some documents. "Eleanor saved $250,000 over the years, depositing it into a special account for the daughter she gave up for adoption. The money is waiting for you." Sarah's eyes widened. $250,000. "She saved every penny she could for years," Harry explained, "reduced her own expenses, reinvested stock dividends, saved part of every company profit, all thinking about the day she would find you again." Richard got up and walked to the window. "Eleanor told me she would do anything to make up for the years lost with our daughter. Now I understand what she meant." Willow, who had been quiet in her mother's lap, finally spoke. "Mommy, are you coming home with me now?" Sarah looked at Richard, then at Harry and Carol. "I want to go back," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know if I deserve forgiveness for what I did." "All families have problems," Harry said, surprising himself with his own wisdom. "The important thing is that now we know the truth, and we can build something better together." 3 months later, Sarah had given birth to a healthy baby boy, who was named Elliot, after the grandmother he never knew. She used part of Eleanor's inheritance to buy a small house near Harry's penthouse, where she could raise her children with dignity, while Richard helped her as the loving grandfather he always wanted to be. Harry transformed the secret room in the basement of the construction company into a memorial for Eleanor, where the whole family gathered monthly to remember the woman who, even carrying so many secrets and pains, never stopped loving and caring for everyone around her. Willow, now 5 years old and physically healthier, often took yellow flowers to the symbolic grave in the cemetery, where Richard had cried for decades for the daughter he could never raise. But now, instead of tears of sadness, he shed tears of gratitude for having found not only his lost daughter, but also grandchildren who would fill his remaining days with joy and purpose. The company continued to prosper under Harry's leadership, but he now divided his time between business and his rebuilt family, finally understanding that true wealth was not in his investments or accumulated wealth, but in the human connections he had almost lost because of secrets buried for too long. On the wall of the memorial, next to the photographs of Eleanor, Harry hung a quote he found in one of the last letters she wrote to her dearest angel. "True love isn't perfect, but it always finds its way back home." And so, after months of suffering, searching, and painful revelations, the Blake family finally found the peace that Eleanor had always wanted for them all. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.